Dear Chosen One, they thought they could rewrite reality. They convinced themselves that their power was permanent, that their actions would never come back to haunt them. They trampled over you without hesitation, spoke lies about you without fear, and laughed at your pain as if they were immune to consequence. But the universe doesn't forget. The same deception they once controlled has now turned against them. Look at them now, struggling, unraveling, suffocating under the weight of their own choices. They spent years throwing shadows your way, only to be swallowed by their own darkness. Their power was never real. Their control was an illusion, and the truth, it was always waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. They believed they had time. They didn't. They believed they could outrun justice. They couldn't. They believed they were untouchable. Now, they are learning what it means to be powerless. To those who have supported this mission through super thanks, thank you. Your energy fuels this movement. Your presence here is not a coincidence. It is a calling. If you feel it, if you know deep down that everything is shifting in your favor, comment 777 below. Let the world know you see it, you feel it, you are ready for what comes next. They thought your silence meant defeat. They mistook your patience for surrender. But the chosen do not chase revenge. We don't need to. Now let's break it all down, step by step, because once you see what's happening, you will never look at your enemies the same way again. God's chosen ones, your enemies, ignored the warnings. Now karma has made them sick. Number 1, the clock struck 0. Now they pay the price. You knew this day would come. You felt it long before it arrived. Every time they deceived you, betrayed you, and tried to destroy you, you sensed something they couldn't, the silent ticking of a divine clock. They thought they were untouchable. They mistook God's patience for permission. They laughed, thinking their cruelty would never return to them. But you knew better, and now the clock has struck 0. The moment they ignored is here. Did they really believe they could mock you and walk away free? Did they not realize that every wicked act was recorded, every injustice weighed on a scale they could not see? God is not blind. God is not mocked. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. And now they reap. At first it comes quietly, like a whisper they can't quite hear. A lost opportunity. A door that once opened so easily now remains shut. Their confidence begins to waver. Their influence begins to fade. They reach out, but no one answers. And then the sickness begins. Not just in their bodies, but in their minds, their finances, their very foundation. They try to hold on to what they once controlled, but everything slips through their fingers like sand. Does this sound familiar? It should, because history has repeated this pattern over and over again. Pharaoh thought he was invincible. He enslaved God's people, dismissed every warning, and hardened his heart against justice. Even as plague after plague struck Egypt, he convinced himself he would remain untouchable. But when the final judgment came, he found himself powerless. He chased after God's chosen ones, believing his army would crush them, only to be swallowed by the very waters he once ruled. Exodus 14:27-28. And what about Haman? He built gallows to destroy Mordecai, confident that his power would ensure victory. He strutted through the palace, convinced of his success, until the king turned against him, and he was hung on the very gallows he built. Esther 7:10. Do you see the pattern? The same trap they set for you was never yours to fall into. It was theirs all along. And now your enemies are walking this same road. At first, they don't understand what's happening. They try to carry on as usual, pretending nothing is wrong. But the signs are undeniable. Their friends, the ones who once cheered them on, begin to disappear. The connections they once relied on suddenly seem powerless. That untouchable confidence, it starts to crack. Then comes the paranoia, the sleepless nights, the feeling that something is watching them, something they can't escape. Because how do you run from judgment that lives inside you? They try to pray, but their prayers feel empty. How do you ask for mercy when your mouth was once full of curses? How do you find peace when you spent your years destroying others? The wealth they once used as a shield can't protect them now. The power they once flexed is slipping through their hands. And you? You don't even need to watch, because the chosen ones never need to seek revenge. Our very existence is judgment enough. Have you ever noticed how your presence unsettles them? You walk into a room and they shift uncomfortably. You speak and their pulse quickens. Why? Because you are a reminder of everything they tried to destroy, but failed. Look at Joseph. His own brothers threw him into a pit, convinced they had erased his future. They sold him into slavery, believing they had buried his destiny. But what happened? God lifted him higher. And in the end, those same brothers who betrayed him had to stand before him, desperate for his mercy. Genesis 50:20. Look at David. King Saul hated him, hunted him, spent years trying to kill him. But David never had to take revenge. God did it for him. Saul, once mighty, fell upon his own sword, while David rose to the throne. 1 Samuel 31:4. Your enemies ignored the warnings. They mistook patience for weakness. They convinced themselves that nothing would happen to them. But justice moves in silence until it strikes. And now, it is too late for them. No second chances, no rewinds, no escaping the weight of their own choices. This is not a lesson. They are not being taught. This is a sentence, and they are being judged. And here's the best part. You don't even need to care. While they crumble under the weight of their own wickedness, you are rising higher than ever. The energy they used to try and break you, it is now the very force lifting you to the next level. They wanted to destroy you. Instead, they destroyed themselves. And now, they aren't laughing anymore. Number 2, their sickness runs deeper than the body. It's a curse that devours everything. You have seen it before, the slow unraveling of those who once thought they were untouchable. At first they brush it off. They tell themselves it's just stress, just a phase, just something they can power through. But you and I both know the truth. This is not something they can shake off. This is not just fatigue or anxiety. This is a sickness that rots from the inside out. They believed they could manipulate, deceive, and destroy others without consequence. They thought their cunning would always keep them ahead. But what happens when the very mind that once outmaneuvered others now works against them? They hesitate. They second-guess themselves. They drown in their own paranoia. The once calculating strategist is now lost, fumbling, making mistakes they never used to make. They feel it, don't they? The loss of control. The slipping grip. Do you remember King Saul? He was once chosen, anointed, powerful, but his jealousy, his deceit, and his disobedience turned his own mind into his enemy. He became restless, tormented, unable to find peace even in his own palace. He hunted David, believing he could eliminate the one chosen by God. But the real battle was never between him and David. It was between him and his own unraveling mind. And in the end, Saul's own sword became the tool of his downfall. 1 Samuel 31:4. And now your enemies walk the same path. At night their demons wake up. The memories of their wrongdoings crawl into bed with them, whispering in the silence. Have you ever noticed how restless they've become? How their confidence has turned to doubt? They were once the ones who controlled the narrative, who made others question their worth, who thrived on fear and power. But now they can't even trust themselves. And the irony, they mocked faith. They dismissed God. they laughed at those who sought peace. But now they crave the very thing they ridiculed. They chase distractions, drowning in noise, but the silence is where their judgment whispers the loudest. They long for fulfillment, but the universe is not answering them. Because when you spend a lifetime rejecting the truth, there comes a day when the truth rejects you. Their sickness is deeper than the body. It is in their spirit. Their empire, built on lies and control, is turning to dust. The loyalty they once commanded is gone. The respect they once demanded, vanished. Look at Judas. He had power, he had access, he was among the chosen, but greed, deceit, and betrayal ate him alive. He thought 30 pieces of silver could buy his future, but instead it sealed his fate. And in the end, his own guilt destroyed him before anyone else could. Matthew 27:3-5. And now your enemies feel it. The weight, the curse, the unraveling, and the worst part, they are still alive to watch every piece of their life fall apart. They wanted power. Now they know what it feels like to be powerless. Number 3. The delay was their trap, and now the cage has slammed shut. A fool mistakes silence for safety. They thought they were winning. Every deception, every betrayal, every underhanded move, they counted them as victories. Did they truly believe that the lack of immediate consequences meant they had escaped justice? But what they never understood was this: delay is not escape. Delay is the setup. They saw the silence as permission. They believed they had found a way to outmaneuver divine law. But every extra day they thought they were getting away with it was simply more time for them to expose their true nature. They weren't slipping through the cracks. They were digging their own graves, deeper and deeper with every arrogant decision. Do you remember the story of Nebuchadnezzar? He was warned. He had visions of his downfall. He was given time to humble himself. But he ignored the warnings. He saw his success as his own doing, his power as eternal. And then, in one moment, it was all taken from him. He lost his mind. He wandered the fields like a beast, living in humiliation, until he finally acknowledged that the Most High rules over all. Daniel 4:30-33. This is how God works. He gives time, not as an escape, but as a final test. Your enemies were given chance after chance to turn back. They could have stopped. They could have changed, but they refused. And now, the trap has closed. At first, they don't even realize it. The shift is subtle, small inconveniences, unexplained losses. The floor beneath them begins to crack, but then suddenly it's gone. One moment they were on top. The next, surrounded, drowning in a downfall they never saw coming. They reach out for help, but no one is there, because no one wants to be caught in the wreckage of a collapsing empire. Have you noticed how their confidence has turned into desperation? The ones who once sneered at you now look lost. The ones who believed they were above consequence are now trapped in the very cage they built for others. The worst part? They know they did this to themselves. They look back now, and it all starts making sense. The warnings weren't empty threats. They were tests. Tests they failed over and over again. And now, time has run out. Look at the rich man in Luke 16. He lived in luxury while Lazarus, the beggar, suffered at his gates. He ignored every opportunity to change, believing his wealth made him untouchable. But then the roles reversed. The rich man found himself in torment, begging for a second chance, but it was too late. Luke 16:19-31. Your enemies thought they were safe. They thought they had time. They thought they could manipulate the game. But the game was never in their hands to begin with. Patience was never permission. It was the final countdown, and the clock just hit 0. Number 4. They built their own curse. Now it's tearing them apart. Did they really think they could play their games forever? That every deception, every betrayal, every twisted scheme would simply dissolve into nothingness? They walked with arrogance, convinced that the world revolved around their ability to manipulate and control. They laughed at the idea of justice, dismissing it as superstition meant for the weak. But justice does not sleep, and now the fire they lit for others has turned into an inferno that is consuming them whole. They believed they were building an empire, securing their power, making themselves invincible. But what they were truly building was a curse, one constructed by their own hands, brick by brick, deception by deception. What they failed to understand is this: energy does not disappear. Every action they took, every lie they spread, every time they crushed someone beneath their feet, they weren't just hurting others. They were planting seeds. And now, the harvest has arrived. They have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. Hosea 8:7. At first they will deny it. They will brush it off as stress, a rough patch, a temporary setback. They will convince themselves that they can fix it, that their luck will turn around. But deep down, they feel it, don't they? That growing unease, that whisper they can't quite silence, that feeling that something is shifting beneath their feet. Because their world isn't just falling apart, it's rotting from the inside out. The people they once manipulated now keep their distance. The power they once wielded now feels empty. The very foundation they stood on is turning to dust beneath them. And worst of all, they see it happening, and they can do nothing to stop it. This didn't happen overnight. The destruction wasn't sudden. The cracks were always there. They just refused to see them. Because when you build your life on deception, it doesn't collapse in one grand explosion. It decays, slowly, silently, until one day the weight of your own lies is too much to bear, and everything crumbles into ruin. Have you ever heard the story of Samson and Delilah? Samson was chosen, anointed, powerful beyond measure, but he let his desires blind him. He played with fire, revealing his strength's secret to Delilah, trusting the wrong hands with his destiny. And in one moment of betrayal, his power was stripped, his enemies captured him, and he was left in chains, grinding grain like a slave. Judges 16:19-21. His own choices became the chains that bound him. And that is exactly what is happening to your enemies. They thought they were outsmarting fate, but all they were doing was tightening the rope around their own necks. They thought they were powerful, but all they were doing was trading short-term wins for long-term destruction. And now, there's no running from what they set in motion. They were warned. Over and over again, they had the chance to change, to turn back, to undo the damage, but they didn't listen. Because the illusion of control was too intoxicating, the feeling of dominance too addicting. And now it's over. The power they once boasted about is gone. The influence they once flexed is fading. The people who once praised them are nowhere to be found. The energy they sent out has circled back, and it is relentless. It is ruthless, and it will not stop until the debt is paid in full. And the worst part, they cannot escape themselves. This sickness isn't just external, it's internal. It is in their thoughts, their choices, their very existence. They wake up every day knowing that there is no one left to blame. Have you ever watched a man drown in his own consequences? Look at King Herod. He stood against John the Baptist, imprisoned him, and ultimately had him executed. He thought his power made him invincible, that silencing the voice of truth would secure his reign. But in the end, Herod died in misery, eaten from the inside out, both physically and spiritually. Acts 12:21-23. That is what happens when people refuse to acknowledge the warnings. And now, your enemies finally understand, but it is too late. Their bodies are failing, their minds are restless, Their spirits are withering under the weight of everything they have done. No doctor can heal them. No wealth can buy relief, because this is not something that can be treated. This is the manifestation of every wrong they refuse to make right. And now they must live with the truth that they did this to themselves. They wanted control. Now they are powerless. They wanted to build an empire. Now they are watching it burn. They wanted to win. Now they know they lost, and there is no one left to save them, because the hands that shaped this nightmare were always their own. Number 5. They laughed too soon. Now the joke is on them. Have you ever watched someone celebrate too early? A fool raises their hands in victory before the race is even over, not realizing that the finish line is still ahead. And your enemies, they laughed too soon. They laughed when you struggled. They mocked your pain, delighted in your setbacks, and took pleasure in watching you suffer. Your hardships were their entertainment. They whispered behind your back, spread lies, and convinced themselves that they had won. Every betrayal, every attack, every time they tried to break you, they thought it was a victory. But what they didn't realize was that they were laughing in the middle of the story, not at the end. And now the joke isn't funny anymore. The very things they took pride in, their power, their deception, their ability to twist reality in their favor, have turned against them. The manipulation that once worked so effortlessly now falls apart in their hands. The people who once cheered for them now avoid them. Their words, once sharp weapons, now sound hollow. They thought they had secured their success, but all they did was set the stage for their own downfall. Have they forgotten what happened to Goliath? He stood tall, laughing at David, mocking him as just a boy with a sling. He believed himself invincible, convinced that his size and strength made him untouchable. But his arrogance blinded him, and in one moment, one single stone, his world ended. 1 Samuel 17:45-50. Your enemies made the same mistake. They mistook temporary advantage for permanent success. They mistook your struggles for their victory. They mistook their delay in consequences as an escape from them. And now, reality is catching up. Their world isn't just shifting, it's collapsing. The cracks they ignored are splitting wide open. The foundation they thought was unshakable is crumbling beneath their feet, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. At first, they will pretend nothing is wrong. They will call it bad luck, a temporary misfortune. But as the losses pile up, as the betrayals they once dealt are returned to them tenfold, they will begin to understand. This is not random. This is not coincidence. This is a reckoning. They laughed when you suffered. Now they are the ones losing sleep. They laughed when you struggled. Now they are the ones suffocating under the weight of their own choices. They laughed when they thought they had won, but now they see they never won anything at all, because their victories were built on deception, their success was borrowed, and now the universe has come to collect its debt. And the price? Everything they thought was theirs to keep. One by one, it is all slipping through their fingers. Their power fades, their relationships crumble, their finances dry up. The people who once stood by them now vanish, not because they suddenly gained a conscience, but because no one wants to stand next to a sinking ship. And the worst part, they did this to themselves. They spent so much time trying to destroy you that they never realized they were destroying themselves, because the energy you send out always returns. Look at Haman. He built gallows, believing he had won, thinking he had outmaneuvered everyone, including God. He laughed, celebrated his cunning, convinced that he would rise while others fell. But in the end, he was the one who hung from the very trap he built. Esther 7:10. That is exactly what is happening now. They laughed at your pain. Now their own reflection haunts them. They laughed at your isolation. Now they sit alone, abandoned by the same people they once controlled. They laughed when you had nothing. Now they finally understand what that feels like. But here's the difference. You survived it, you rose from it, you were built to endure. They are not built like you. They don't know how to handle loss, how to face their own darkness, how to navigate the emptiness they once wished upon you. And that's what makes this so painful for them, because for the first time in their lives, they are powerless. Powerless against the truth, powerless against their own regrets, powerless against the same forces they thought they controlled. They thought their laughter was the final note in the story, but the final note is silence, and now that silence is deafening. Number 6. Their power was a loan, not a gift. Now the debt is due. Did they really think they were untouchable, that the throne they sat on was theirs forever, that the power they wielded was permanent? They strutted through life as if they were the masters of fate, convinced that their influence was unshakable. But what they never realized was that their power was never truly theirs. It was only on loan, and now the real owner has come to collect. For a time, it seemed like they were invincible. Everything they touched turned to gold. Their words commanded attention. Their influence shaped the world around them. They could destroy reputations, manipulate situations, and rewrite narratives at will. They thought they were above the system. But the truth? They were just on borrowed time. Have they forgotten what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? He ruled over the greatest empire of his time, believing his power was a reflection of his own greatness. He walked through his palace boasting, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Daniel 4:30. But while the words were still in his mouth, God stripped him of everything. He was driven away, reduced to living like an animal, eating grass, humbled beyond recognition. His power was never his own. It was only on loan. And now, your enemies are experiencing the same fate. They thought their authority was their birthright, that their success was the result of their own genius. They convinced themselves that their ability to deceive, manipulate, and control was proof that they were above justice. But now, they feel the shift, the slow, merciless withdrawal of everything they thought they owned. The people who once bowed at their feet now look away. The opportunities that once flowed freely now dry up. The effortless power they wielded is slipping through their fingers like sand. At first, they refuse to believe it. Denial is their first response. They convince themselves it's just a temporary misstep. But as the days pass, as the losses mount, as the very foundation they stood on begins to crack beneath them, they realize this isn't an accident. This is justice being restored. Because when power is misused, it is taken away. They thought they could play the game forever, that they could build their kingdom on the backs of others and never pay the price, that as long as they kept winning, there would be no consequences. But power demands responsibility. And when you refuse to be responsible, it is stripped away. They laughed when they were at the top, convinced that the silence of the universe meant permission. They believed they had mastered the system, that the rules didn't apply to them. But the truth? The universe was never blind. It was just patient. Because when a thief steals, he is not caught immediately. He is allowed to enjoy his stolen riches, to grow comfortable in his illusion of victory, until the day the hand of justice knocks at his door. And now the knock has come. One by one, everything they built is being taken from them. The reputation they held so dearly, tarnished. The relationships they relied on, vanished. The wealth they thought could shield them, dissolving. No phone calls can reverse this. No connections can buy their way out. Because this isn't a punishment from men. This is divine retribution. They watch as everything slips away, as the very people they once controlled walk away without a second thought. Not because those people suddenly grew a conscience, but because no one wants to stand next to a sinking ship. They thought they were at the top forever. Now they are learning what it feels like to be at the bottom. Look at King Saul. He was chosen to rule, given divine authority. But instead of honoring the responsibility, he became obsessed with power, driven by jealousy, blinded by arrogance. And in the end, his throne was taken from him, his kingdom was given to another, and he died by his own hand, powerless and abandoned. 1 Samuel 31:4. That is what happens when power is misused. They thought power was their reward. Now they understand it was only ever a test, and they failed. Because true power is never about control, it is about wisdom. It is about knowing that what is given can always be taken away. They misused the loan they were given, and now the debt is being collected, and they are left with nothing. Number 7. The ones they trusted most will be the first to betray them. Did they really believe that the people around them were loyal, that the hands they shook would never turn against them, that they could manipulate, intimidate, and buy allegiance forever? Now they are learning the truth in the most painful way possible. They thought they had built an unbreakable circle, a fortress of allies who would stand by their side no matter what. They handpicked their people carefully, surrounding themselves with those who cheered their victories and justified their wrongs. But what they never realized was that a circle built on fear, manipulation, and self-interest is not a circle at all. It is a ticking time bomb. And now that explosion has begun. The same people they controlled are slipping away. The ones who once followed them blindly are stepping back. The voices that once defended them are now whispering behind closed doors, because their so-called loyalty was never real. It was a fragile web of convenience, held together only when it was profitable, when it was easy, when there was something to gain. But now the losses have begun, and no one wants to go down with them. Look at Judas Iscariot. He walked with Jesus, witnessed miracles, heard the deepest truths, yet 30 pieces of silver were all it took for him to betray the one he claimed to follow. Matthew 26:14-16. He thought he was in control, that he was making a calculated move. But in the end, his own betrayal became his destruction. Matthew 27:5. And now your enemies are facing the same fate. One by one, the people they trusted most will start to turn. At first it will be subtle, small betrayals, quiet distancing, averted gazes. They'll feel the shift but won't want to acknowledge it. They'll tell themselves it's nothing, that they're imagining it, but then it will become undeniable. They will hear their own name in the mouths of those they once called allies. They will watch their closest confidants suddenly side with their enemies. They will feel the weight of their own medicine, the betrayal they once served so freely, now being handed back to them in doses they cannot handle. They laughed when they did it to others. Now it's happening to them, because when the tables turn, they turn completely. The secrets they shared will become weapons. The people they relied on will suddenly be unreachable. The ones who once defended them will now be the first to expose them. And what can they do? Nothing. They built their empire on fear, on control, on false loyalty. And when you rule with fear, you are never truly safe. Because fear only lasts as long as the power that enforces it. And their power, it's slipping. The cracks are showing. The foundation is weak. And the people they once controlled can smell the collapse coming. No one wants to be caught under the rubble, so they leave. Or worse, they turn. Look at King David and his son Absalom. Absalom was charismatic, powerful, and cunning. He gained the trust of the people, positioning himself as the next ruler, plotting against his own father. He thought he'd won, that his power was secured. But what happened? The very men he trusted abandoned him when the tides changed. He was left vulnerable, alone. and ultimately met a tragic end. 2 Samuel 18:9-15. That is the fate of your enemies. The same mouths that once spoke praises will now spit poison in their direction. The same hands that once helped them rise will now pull them down, and they will be completely alone. No one to run to, no one to cover for them, no one to silence the whispers when they turn into screams. Because here's the truth: those who build their success by using people will always be destroyed by the very people they used. They thought they were the puppeteer. Now they are the puppet, being discarded. They thought they were feared. Now they are forgotten. And the worst part, they will see it coming, but they won't be able to stop it. They will scramble, trying to hold it all together. They will beg, manipulate, Lieutenant, but nothing will work. Because their people don't care anymore. There is nothing left to gain, nothing left to fear, nothing left to fight for. And now they finally understand what it feels like to be powerless. The ones they trusted most will be the first to betray them, and there is no one left to blame but themselves. Number 8. No one is listening. Their cries for help go unanswered. Have you ever seen someone who once had the world in their hands suddenly realize they have nothing left? Someone who once spoke and people listened, who once commanded attention and others obeyed, now reduced to silence? That is the fate of your enemies. The same mouths that once spread lies now beg for relief. The same voices that used to echo with arrogance now whisper in desperation. But no one is listening. They never believed in consequences. They thought they could manipulate, betray, deceive, without ever paying the price. Every cruel act, every backstab, every heart they broke, they did it without hesitation, believing they would always remain untouchable. But they were wrong. Did they really believe that the energy they put out would never return, that they could destroy others and walk away unscathed, that their choices wouldn't eventually build the very reality they would be forced to live in? Now, they are drowning in the world they created. They scoffed at warnings. They ignored every sign. They were given countless chances to stop, to turn back, to fix what they had broken, but they refused. And now their downfall is unfolding, and it does not stop. It does not slow down, and it does not listen to apologies that come too late. Then they will call to me, but I will not answer. They will look for me, but will not find me, since they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord. Proverbs 1:28-29. Their world is collapsing. The doors they once walked through effortlessly, now locked. The people they once controlled now refuse to answer. The safety nets they thought would always be there, gone. At first they pretend it's nothing. They lie to themselves, telling themselves this is just a temporary setback. But as the days pass, as their phone calls go unanswered, as the walls of their own making close in, they start to feel the weight of their isolation. Do they remember all the times they left others stranded? All the times they silenced voices that spoke truth? All the times they ignored someone else's pain? Now they stand alone. Now, when they cry out for help, their own voice falls on deaf ears. Look at King Saul. He once had everything: favor, power, a kingdom. But instead of ruling with wisdom, he let pride and paranoia consume him. He disobeyed, betrayed, and sought to destroy the very people God had chosen. And, in his final moments, he begged for guidance, pleaded for answers. But God no longer answered him. His own cries went unheard. 1 Samuel 28:6. This is exactly where your enemies stand now. They spent years tearing others down, thinking it made them stronger. Now they have no strength left. They spent so much time making enemies that now there is no one left to call a friend. They thought they would always have power. Now they don't even have control over their own life. And the worst part? They know exactly why this is happening. They can't pretend they don't. They can't lie to themselves anymore. They thought there would always be an escape. They thought they could fix things when it was convenient for them. They thought time was on their side, but some things cannot be undone. Some mistakes have no second chance. Some betrayals leave scars that never heal. Some doors, once closed, never open again. And now they understand. But understanding too late, that's just another part of the punishment. Number 9. No cure exists for the inevitable. Now they must face what's coming. Have you ever met someone who thought they were invincible? Someone who believed that every consequence had an escape, every mistake could be erased, and every sin could be covered up? Did they truly think they could outrun justice forever? For years they played the game, convinced they had mastered every move. They built an empire on deception, thinking their power would always protect them. When a scandal surfaced, they had people to make it disappear. When trouble came knocking, they had money to buy their way out. But what happens when they finally face something that no amount of money, power, or influence can fix? At first they refuse to believe it. The doctors give them reports, but the tests make no sense. The specialists, the ones who cure the incurable, are shaking their heads, helpless. Every connection they once relied on is now silent. The safety nets they thought would always be there, gone. Because this isn't a disease of the body, it's a sentence. Look at Steve Jobs, a man who revolutionized the world with his ideas, whose influence reshaped technology and business forever. Yet when faced with his greatest challenge, his own mortality, he could not buy his way out. He had access to the best medical care, unlimited resources, and the brightest minds, yet nothing could stop what was already set in motion. His own words near the end of his life. At this moment, lying on the bed, sick and remembering all my life, I realized that all my recognition and wealth are meaningless. Now, your enemies are experiencing the same fate. They thought they could escape consequences forever. But what they failed to understand is that there are no shortcuts when it comes to judgment. There are no loopholes left, no more favors to call in, no more tricks to play. Where are their allies now? Where are the people who once followed them, who once cheered their victories? Gone. Because when an empire starts to crumble, the first ones to leave are those who were only there for the benefits. Look at Harvey Weinstein. He once ruled Hollywood. His power was unquestionable, and his name carried weight. He controlled careers, commanded respect, and moved like a king in his industry. But when the truth caught up to him, those who once stood by his side vanished overnight. His name became a curse, his influence collapsed, and now he sits in a prison cell, powerless, forgotten, alone. That is the fate of your enemies. Did they think this day would never come? Look at Nebuchadnezzar, a king who stood at the pinnacle of power, believing himself greater than all men. He boasted about his kingdom, his wealth, his control. He saw himself as a god among men. But what happened? God stripped everything from him. His mind turned against him, and he was cast out, living like a wild animal. He lost his throne, his dignity, and everything he once boasted about. Daniel 4:28-33. It wasn't until he humbled himself that he was restored, but by then he had already suffered the consequences of his arrogance. And now your enemies face the same fate. They could escape everything except themselves. There is a way out, but it requires something they refuse to do. It requires them to face themselves, to acknowledge, to admit, to accept responsibility for the destruction they've caused. It requires humility, and that is the one thing they are incapable of. Because even now, even as their world collapses, even as they suffer in ways they never imagined possible, their pride still whispers that they can beat this. They still believe they can outthink, outmaneuver, manipulate their way out one last time. They convince themselves that if they just find the right angle, the right person, the right scheme, they can escape. But what they don't understand is that this isn't something they can negotiate. There are no loopholes, no shortcuts. There's no one left to bribe, no one left to convince, no one left to care. They had chance after chance to turn back, to change, to make things right. But every chance they were given, they threw it away. And now they remain trapped. Not because healing isn't possible, not because redemption isn't real, but because their own arrogance won't allow them to reach for it. So they suffer, not in silence but in isolation, not because the world is cruel, but because they wrote this ending for themselves. And the worst part, they finally see it, they finally understand, but it's too late. Number 10. Their suffering will match their sins, a perfectly crafted downfall. Have you ever seen someone who once lived without limits suddenly realize they can no longer outrun their past? Have you ever watched someone who thought they were untouchable finally face the weight of their own actions? Did they truly believe they could escape forever? Every lie they told, every deception they spread, every selfish betrayal, it all had a price. And now that price is being collected in the most poetic way possible. The same tools they once used to harm others have now become the weapons of their own destruction. A thief's hands will one day tremble too much to steal. A liar's voice will one day fail them. A deceiver's mind will one day turn against them. This is not bad luck. This is not coincidence. This is perfect balance. They thought they could manipulate the system, twist reality, and rewrite consequences. But what they never realized is that the universe keeps perfect score. And now the balance has shifted. Look at Lance Armstrong, once celebrated as a hero, a champion, an icon of resilience, only for the truth to unravel everything. The same strength he used to dominate his sport became the very thing that betrayed him. His victories were erased, his name tarnished, his reputation shattered. He wasn't just stripped of his medals, he was stripped of his identity. The same world that once admired him now looked at him with pity and disgust. And now your enemies are facing the same fate. The lies they told, they're choking on them. The truth they twisted now weighs on their chest like a force they cannot remove. Every false word they spoke now sticks in their mouth like poison. The voice that once commanded respect now trembles with fear. The hands that took what wasn't theirs, now they shake. Every grasp for power, every stolen opportunity, every act of selfish greed is now mirrored in their own physical weakness. The strength they once had is leaving them, just as they once left others empty-handed. Look at Bernie Madoff. He lived in luxury, believing he had cracked the code of power and wealth. But what happened when his empire of deception collapsed? He spent his final days in a prison cell, stripped of everything, watching the empire he built on lies turn to dust. No money, no freedom, no legacy, just the slow, agonizing realization that he did this to himself. And now your enemies stand in front of the same mirror. Look at Pharaoh in the book of Exodus. He refused to listen to warnings, hardened his heart, and believed himself above consequence. Plague after plague came, yet he refused to change. And in the end, the destruction he inflicted on others came crashing back on him. His kingdom fell, his power crumbled, and he watched everything he once ruled be swallowed by the Red Sea. Exodus 14:27-28. And now the same judgment has come for your enemies, because this isn't just karma, this is a mirror that no longer reflects the powerful, untouchable person they once thought they were. A mirror that forces them to see the truth. And now they can't stand what they see. The people they once manipulated, gone. The influence they once used to shield themselves, fading, the power they once held over others slipping through their fingers like water. No doctor can diagnose this, no amount of money can fix it, no connection can shield them from what they have unleashed. Because this isn't external, it's internal. And the irony of it all, they did this to themselves. The pain they caused has returned home. The chaos they created has found its way back to its source. And now it refuses to leave. They thought they were the ones in control, but now they are nothing but victims of their own choices. Number 11. The mightiest will fall, and there's no soft landing. Have you ever watched a giant collapse? Have you ever seen someone who walked with arrogance suddenly lose everything? Did they ever think their fall would come this fast? The higher they climbed, the harder the ground will break them when they fall. They walked like giants, heads high, shoulders back, filled with the confidence of someone who believed their position was permanent. They flaunted their power, their influence, their ability to manipulate and dominate. They believed the world revolved around them. They looked down on those they considered weak, mocked those who struggled, laughed at those who lost. But what they never understood, strength isn't immunity. Power doesn't make you invincible. It just makes you blind to the cracks forming beneath your feet. And now those cracks have turned into a free fall. Look at Elizabeth Holmes. Once hailed as a revolutionary in biotechnology, a self-made billionaire, the face of innovation, only for it to be revealed that everything she built was a lie. The empire she created collapsed beneath her, and she fell from the heights of Silicon Valley straight into a prison cell. Now, your enemies are experiencing the same downfall. There is no safety net, no soft landing, no way to grab onto what they once controlled. Everything they built on arrogance is crumbling, and the fall isn't quick. It's slow, agonizing, drawn out just enough for them to feel every moment of it. They reach out for help, but there's no one left to catch them. The people who once cheered for them, gone. The connections they once relied on, useless. The same force they used to push others down is now dragging them under. Look at King Belshazzar. He lived in luxury, throwing grand feasts, believing himself untouchable, until one night a hand appeared and wrote on the wall, "You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting." And before the night was over, his kingdom was taken, and his reign was no more. Daniel 5:25-31. That is the fate of your enemies, because the strongest don't just fall, they shatter. They lose everything piece by piece while still alive to witness it all. Their confidence gone, their influence fading. The respect they once commanded turned into whispers of pity and ridicule. And the worst part, they know they did this to themselves. Because no one stays on top forever. Not when their power was built on deception. Not when their success was carved from the destruction of others. Not when every step they took upward was at the expense of someone else. The climb made them feel unstoppable. The fall is showing them just how weak they really are. And now, as they watch everything collapse around them, they finally understand. Real strength was never about how high you could rise. It was about how well you could stand when the ground beneath you shook. But now, there's no ground left, and no way back up. Number 12. The ones they underestimated will be the ones who rise. Have you ever been overlooked by someone who thought they were better than you? Have you ever watched someone mistake your patience for weakness? Did they truly believe that their arrogance would protect them forever? What happens when the person they dismissed becomes the one they can no longer ignore? They thought they had won. Every insult, every dismissal, every time they acted like you didn't matter, it made them feel powerful. They convinced themselves that their arrogance was strength and that your humility was foolishness. They looked at you as if you were beneath them, as if your kindness meant you lacked the ability to fight back. But what they never understood is that real strength isn't loud. It's steady. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118, verse 22. While they basked in their illusion of power, they never noticed the cracks forming beneath them. They assumed their control would last forever, that their influence would always shield them. But nothing built on arrogance lasts. And now the same people who once praised them are starting to step away. The same false sense of control they once had is slipping through their fingers. And the most painful part, there's nothing they can do to stop it. Look at Oprah Winfrey. She was once underestimated, told she wasn't fit for television, rejected by people who couldn't see her worth. But she never fought for their approval. She built her own path. And today, the very people who dismissed her now say her name with respect, while those who doubted her have faded into irrelevance. And now, your enemies are watching you rise. They mocked you for not reacting, for not stooping to their level, for not fighting back the way they expected. But now, as they deal with the fallout of their own actions, they wish they had your strength. Because you didn't need to manipulate to get ahead. You didn't need to destroy others to build yourself up. You didn't need to lie, cheat, or betray to create your success. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up. James 4:10. Look at Nelson Mandela. He was imprisoned, silenced, dismissed as if his voice held no weight. But while his enemies thrived in their illusion of control, he remained unshaken. And when the time came, the world didn't remember those who oppressed him. It remembered him. Because truth always wins. And that is what's happening to you now. The universe never forgot. Every time they tried to humiliate you, every time they laughed behind your back, every time they acted as if they were above you, it was all being recorded. Not just by time, but by the very energy they put into the world. And now, that energy is returning. Look at Joseph in the Bible. His own brothers underestimated him, mocked him, sold him into slavery, thinking they had destroyed him. But while they celebrated their false victory, Joseph was rising. And when the famine came, when their world collapsed, they had to stand before him, the very man they had tried to destroy. Genesis 45:4-5. And now, that's exactly what's happening. Their downfall isn't just their punishment, it's your vindication. It's the world recognizing that you were right all along, that your patience wasn't naivety, that your silence wasn't weakness, and that in the end, truth always wins. Number 13. The message wasn't for them, it was for you. Have you ever watched someone ignore a warning you knew was meant to save them? Have you ever felt a deep knowing that others dismissed as paranoia? Did they ever stop to wonder why they felt uneasy, but ignored it anyway? What happens when the message they laughed at becomes the truth they can no longer escape? They never listened. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. The message was never meant for them. The signs, the warnings, the moments of truth that passed through their lives like flashing lights. They ignored them all, convinced that they were above it. They laughed at what they didn't understand, mocked what they thought didn't apply to them. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Matthew 11:15. And now, look at them. The very things they dismissed have come full circle. The whispers they brushed off as paranoia, the gut feelings they silenced, the uneasy moments where they felt something wasn't right but carried on anyway. It was never just their imagination. The message was always there, but it was never meant to reach them. Look at Amelia Earhart. She was warned before she took off on her final flight. Experts expressed concern, cautioned her against taking unnecessary risks. But she ignored the warnings, convinced that she knew better. And in the end, she vanished without a trace. Some people cannot be saved from their own choices. And now your enemies are realizing that they were never above the truth. But you were different. You felt the pull. You recognized the signs, even when the world tried to convince you that you were overthinking, that you were just being paranoid, that you should ignore the tension you felt in your bones. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 27:12. Look at Winston Churchill. Before World War II, he saw the danger others refused to acknowledge. He warned them, he spoke up, but the world laughed, dismissed him, called him a fearmonger, until the war came, until reality forced them to see what he had seen all along. That is what's happening to you now. The message, this truth, this reckoning, it was never for them, it was for you, because you were the one who needed to see, to understand, to wake up. Look at Noah in the Bible. He was warned about the flood long before the first drop of rain fell. He listened while the rest of the world laughed. They called him crazy, mocked his preparations, refused to hear the warning. And then the flood came. And suddenly Noah wasn't the fool anymore. Genesis 7:11-16. And now, that's exactly what's happening. You were given insight they weren't. You felt the shift before it happened. You saw the destruction before it arrived. Because you were never meant to fall with them. And while they ignored the warnings, dismissed the truth, and convinced themselves they were above it all, you listened. That's why you are standing today. That's why you are prepared while they are lost. That's why you knew what was coming before it arrived. Because the message was never for them. It was always for you. Beloved chosen one, have you ever wondered why you had to endure so much? Have you questioned why betrayal, loss and hardship seemed to follow you while others thrived in deception? Did you ever doubt whether all the pain was leading somewhere? Everything you went through, every heartbreak, every moment of confusion, every time you felt abandoned or misunderstood, was not without purpose. It was preparing you. It was shaping you into the person who could stand strong while everything around you fell apart. The truth was never meant to save them. It was meant to free you. They weren't supposed to get the warning. They were the warning. And now, look at them. Look at what happens to those who refuse to change, who believe they can outrun justice, who convince themselves they will never have to face what they've sown. They thought they had time. They didn't. They thought they could manipulate their way out of consequences. They couldn't. They thought their power, their connections, and their illusions of control would last forever. They never do. But you walked away. You paid attention. You listened. That's why you're still here. That's why you're watching this unfold from the outside, not from within. Because the message wasn't meant to keep them safe. It was meant to prepare you. You were never the fool. You were never weak. You were never the one losing. You were simply the only one paying attention. And that's why you're still rising while they're falling. If this message resonated with you, if it strengthened your spirit, and if you believe in continuing to share truth with those who need it, consider supporting this mission by donating through Super Thanks. Your contribution helps create more content that speaks to the hearts of the chosen ones like you. May you walk forward with confidence, knowing that your journey was never in vain. May you continue to rise, untouched by the chaos that consumes those who refuse to listen. May you receive abundance, joy, and the fulfillment that only comes from walking in truth. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are chosen. And now it's your time to shine.